Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. I'm going to guess that most of you don't know what the World Zionist Congress is and are not aware that they're holding an election, which takes place online and begins in the United States on March 10th, running until May 4th. And it will establish how a budget of about $2 billion will be divided up by Jewish institutions over the next 5 years. It was established by Theodor Herzl in 1897, and the Congress and its representatives, who hail from Jewish communities around the world, allocate this money to Jewish causes every year and oversee what are called in Israel the national institutions. These are the World Zionist Organization, that carries out the Congress's vision. There's also the Jewish Agency, which we all know plays a central role in Aliyah to Israel, immigration. And then there's Keren Kayemet L'Israel, Kakal. Now, there's not exactly winners or losers in this election, but it's about voting and getting the slate that you want into the Congress to help make those decisions about how those allocations are made. The voting is complicated. There's about 520 something seats. They're divided up according to different geographic areas. In Israel, they're based on how we Israelis voted in the last elections to the Knesset. But overall, you have a part that comes from the United States, you have other part that comes from other parts around the world. And this election that's coming up and the voting begins on March 10th is seen to be dramatic because it really will determine not just the allocation of the resources, but also what is the future identity of Israel as a Zionist enterprise. What does it mean to be Zionist today? And what does it mean for Israel diaspora relations? I'm joined on today's episode by Yizhar Hess, who is the vice chairman of the World Zionist Organization and a representative of Merkaz. That's the slate of the global Masorti conservative movement. I've known Yizhar for a long time, back when he served as the executive director of the Masorti movement here in Israel and fought hard and strong for religious pluralism, for an open market when it comes to religion in the country. And we talk also about that. So here's an episode about something that sounds a bit archaic. The World Zionist Congress sounds like it comes from way back in the 1800s, but still very relevant for us today. Have a listen. Dr. Yizhar Hess, it's great to have you on the JPPI podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Toda.
So we're talking about the World Zionist Congress, which starts just in a few days, voting at least, let's call it, starts in just a few days, March 10th in the United States of America. And I think that a lot of people, and including myself to some extent, I have to say, and I do know the so-called the Jewish national, the national institutions, I know them quite well, but I think a lot of people around the world look at some of these, look at the Congress, look at the voting, look at these organizations, and they say they're archaic, they're anachronistic, they're old. What do we need them for? So let's just, before we dive into who's running, what are the platforms, what are the agendas, why is this needed?
So actually, we need to, for a few seconds, to go back to history. So Herzl convened the first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel,
Hmm.
and the ultimate goal was to have a Jewish state, and this goal was achieved in full in 1948. From that moment on, basically, the same democratic platform that Herzl created has another dimension. We have the Knesset, we have the government. This is the parliament of the Jewish people that allows Jews from all over the world not only to have a voice when it comes to Israel, but also to have a vote. So 2/3 of the Congress, it's diaspora Jewry. Only 1/3, it's from Israel. So we do there, jointly, collectively run the assets of the Jewish people, and it's quite significant. The assets that we have are the Jewish Agency and Keren Kayemet Israel. 50% of the board of the Jewish Agency, it's the Congress, and 100% of the board of Keren Kayemet Israel, with a huge budget that exceeds $2 billion a year. 100% of the board is the Congress. So it is significant, not only when it comes to our values of what is Zionism, but also in a very tangible way, how to allocate the funds that belong to the Jewish people.
And just so we understand, the World Zionist Congress, if I'm correct, has about 525 seats, right, with representation from different geographical areas. There's about 200 seats in Israel, which are divided mostly along party lines. Then there's another 150 or so in the US, 170 other countries. And anyone can vote. Any Jewish person can register to vote in these elections.
Based on where he lived. Like, let's talk for a second in the US. There are elections from March 10th to May 4th. In general, all over the world, if you are a Jew over 18, if you are Zionist, and if you pay the Zionist shekel, you can vote. What is Jew? What is a Jew? It's a self-identified Jew. What is Zionist? You have to sign the Zionist program that exceeded the Basel program. It's the motherhood of apple pie of Zionism. Nothing controversial is there. And you have to pay the Zionist shekel, which is technically covering the cost of the elections, but it has a symbolic value as well. It comes from machatzit shekel of the Israelites in the desert, that every family had to pay machatzit shekel. So from the very first Congress, that idea is there, that you have to pay something to be part of the building. These are the conditions.
Now, what effectively, if you could explain to us, does the Congress make decisions about, right? So you mentioned the assets, but I think that there's money involved. Kakal, for example, has lots of land that state land here in Israel that they get paid for the use of that land. So that's money, that's income. But where does this? I've seen $1 billion number thrown around as if like the Congress controls the $1 billion and decides what Jewish causes it goes to. So maybe you could do us a little order, lasot seder, in this balagan of what exactly the Congress does.
So first of all, you're right, Yaakov. It is complicated. It's 127 years, 128 actually years since the first Zionist Congress, and our constitution is something that can only be described by 128 years of Jewish lawyers from all over the world, exhausting each other with amendments. So it is complicated. Having said that, and we'll get to the money aspect in a second. There are other matters that are matters of value. The resolutions that the Congress passes and deliberates are around the very essence of what is Jewish life today and what is Zionism today. Like when we had here in Israel the dispute over the judicial reform, it was the Congress that accepted a very strong resolution against the judicial reform. Okay, collectively as the Jewish people, when we convened together, it was obvious that the Jewish people has an opinion about these issues. And I can give you multiple other decisions that are important when it comes to the values of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, as a strong democracy as we believe it should be. So it has merit. The financial side is something that is definitely a key component, a key issue of why it is so important, also from very practical aspects. And it is true. The Congress controls the money. The Congress controls the biggest collective pot that the Jewish people have. Okay, and it's not $1 billion. It's $2 billion because every year in Keren Kemet Israel there is another segment of the budget that is not part of the regular budget. So together, a year is more than $2 billion that belong to the Jewish people, not to the government of Israel, not to the state of Israel, not even to Israelis solely. It belongs to all of us collectively. And you know what? Since 2/3 of the Congress are world Jewry, it belongs more to world Jewry than to me as an Israeli. And it's money that makes it the biggest NGO of the Jewish people. So you vote to the Congress, you vote to the board of that allocates that amount of money. This is how significant it is. $2 billion. It's 3 times more than all the campaigns of all the Jewish federations in North America together. So it is strong. And that money could be used for wonderful things. It could be used also for things that would not necessarily represent the consensus of the Jewish people, which would be a dramatic mistake because we want to make sure that Zionism is a big tent that attracts as many people as possible and not, God forbid, alienates people from being associated with.
Can you give us some examples, Yizhar, of how this money is used, where it's gone in the past, and where it could be used in the future?
Well, the money of Keren Kayemet Israel goes to forests, of course. We all know how forests are meaningful in the task of Kakal, but not only. Investments in the south of Israel and in the northern part of Israel, something that we did just in the past year, dramatically because of what happened. So it's about infrastructure that has to do with the periphery. This is something that Kakal is very much invested in. Education. I'm
Hmm.
proud to say that in the last few years here, and of course, I'm a political player. I represent Merkaz. Merkaz is the slate of the Masorti conservative world. So I can tell you that our slate, alongside with reform representatives, insisted on investments in education that would be not only in Israel. Because we know that Jewish education and Jewish continuity programs are important in Israel, but definitely important also in outside of Israel. And we doubled the money that is invested in Jewish programs outside of the state of Israel. Now, just imagine that Herzl was with us today. Okay, if Herzl would have come, Herzl founded Keren Kayemet Israel in 1901 in order to purchase land in Israel. That was the most important task that the Jewish people had to execute. Now we are now so many years afterwards. Land in Israel was purchased. Everything is fine. What is the most important task of the Jewish people now? If Herzl was with us today, I'm sure that one of his top three would have been Jewish education outside of Israel. Okay,
Hmm.
so I find it only natural for the biggest collective part of the Jewish people to invest more and more in these kinds of programming outside of Israel. Now, as you can imagine, it's a political system. It's not that everyone gets it. If you are a party in Israel that cares about its constituency in Israel, it's not necessarily easy to understand how the strength of the diaspora Jewry is a key element of us as a Jewish people and of Israel as a thriving state also. And this is the kinds of deliberations that we have in the Congress.
So, what do you say? Because a lot of Israelis would hear you talking right now if you were saying this in Hebrew, and they would say, "What does this guy want from us?" I mean, we got so much trouble here. We got October 7th. We're still in a war. There's still hostages. They're still wounded. There's homes that have not been rebuilt in the north. There are homes that haven't been rebuilt in the south. Cost of living is through the roof. Taxes are going up. The new budget that's passing is going to be draconian in many different ways for a lot of different demographics. How do you make the case, Yizhar, to Israelis that no, this is important? We need to care about the Jews of the diaspora, just like we need to care about our own.
So I do not have to convince Israelis to vote for the Congress because Israelis do not vote for the Congress.
Right.
They actually voted via the Knesset. When I vote, when you and I vote to the elections to the Knesset sends its delegates to the Congress. So to that extent, I don't have to increase participation of Israelis in voting. But you are definitely right. I can tell you that here in my portfolio in the World Zionist Congress, in the WZO, in the World Zionist Organization, my portfolio has to do with Jewish peoplehood. And a good chunk of it is to deal with mechinot and with other key leadership groups in order to advocate for the importance of Israelis to be part of the Jewish peoplehood discourse and understand how important it is for us as Israelis that we will have a thriving diaspora and how meaningful the connections that we should have with Jews who live outside of Israel. And this is definitely one of the tasks of the national institutions, and I'm talking now about the Jewish Agency as well as Keren Kayemet Israel and of course the WZO.
You mentioned that you represent and you're on the slate of the Masorati Olami I guess, party or platform, and you used to be the head, the executive director, I think is the title of the Masorti movement here in Israel before transitioning into vice chairman of the WZO, of the World Zionist Organization. And you and I used to have a lot of conversations back then about matters of religion and state here in Israel, religious pluralism, diversity. We haven't made much progress, I have to say, unfortunately, here in Israel. And I know it's an issue that's dear to your heart as it is to mine and many others, but we haven't made much progress. And what I see also, and maybe I'll just connect this, make this a bit of a broader question, is that traditionally the Haredi parties, you mentioned that when when we vote for the Knesset, we essentially are electing the leader, the people who are going to be the delegates in the World Zionist Congress. So usually, you have the Likud party, the Labor Party, Yesh Atid, and others. For the first time, I think, or maybe it was already the last election, you'll correct me, there now is a ultra-Orthodox slate that or party, Eretz HaKodesh, I think they're called, or something like that, that they are running in the election. What does this all mean, and what is their interest suddenly in what's happening in the World Zionist Congress?
So you touched a very sensitive point, Yaakov. So in the elections of 2020, a new slate joined the race, a Haredi slate. Now, as you, of course, understand, it's a drama because Haredim were never part of the Zionist movement. Herzl was the ultimate enemy. And the fact that they joined could have meant a significant change in the attitude of Haredim towards Zionism. I'm not sure about it in retrospect because actually the reason why they joined, and they didn't even hide it, was the push aside and to fight the influence of Reform and conservative Jews and of pluralistic Jews at large. And they said, oh, this is a place that, unlike the Knesset, pluralistic Jews do have a stake, do have a seat next to the table, so we will need to get in and make sure that it's less effective. And they ran, and I must tell you that we, in those elections, we did not understand in the elections of 2020 how dramatic it is. The Masorti movement, the Merkaz, my slate, was able to bring in the US 15,000 votes. The Reform movement did a little better. They got 27 or 28,000 votes. The Haredim, who ran for the first time, were able to bring more than 20,000 votes in the New York area only.
And let's just keep in mind for a moment, right, that demographically speaking, they maybe make up 5% of American Jewry.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And now in the Congress, they are represented almost as a fifth of American Jewry are Haredim, which is such an absurd. Now, we are the fault. It's our failure. We were not able to awake our constituency in a meaningful way. So in the entire United States of America, only 125,000 Jews voted. And more than 20,000 of them were Haredim, which is something that definitely doesn't make sense when it comes to the makeup of North American Jewry. And the ramifications, Yaakov, were dramatic for the first time since the establishment of the Zionist movement. For the first time since Herzl, the pluralistic side of Zionist thinking became a minority. And it created a drama. It created a drama both in the Jewish Agency and in Keren Kemet Israel and other bodies.
How did it express itself? What happened practically?
So first of all, one of the tasks of the Jewish Agency is all the process of eligibility for Aliyah. And now, all of a sudden, at the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency, there are Haredi Jews that according to their hashkafa, according to their outlook, now it's a legitimate outlook, it's not better than mine, but according to their hashkafa, a Reform convert or a Masorti conservative convert is not Jewish. Now, it wasn't ever part of the discourse of the Jewish Agency. It was always, part of the disputes that we all know well that we have with the government, state and religion issues. But part of the Zionist movement, we are the widest tent possible. And all of a sudden, there is people who really think that, it's not... Judaism is only one thing and there is only one way to be Jewish, that pluralism, it's not part of their ethos in any way. even more so, they fight it, and this is for their reason to join. So it changed from that perspective. Secondly, you know that for many years, Yaakov, the only source of funding that the non-Orthodox movements received in Israel was from the national institutions, particularly from the Jewish Agency and now also from Keren Kayemet Israel. And one of their goals is, of course, to minimize it, to say, listen, or even to cancel it. This is since Reform and Conservative Jews, that kind of Judaism is not authentic Judaism. It shouldn't be funded in Israel by the Knesset, and it should be funded by the collective part of the Jewish people. This is why the coming elections are so critical. They're
Hmm.
so critical because we know that that the way to work in a political system is by participation. And Herzl left us with a political system. Okay, the Congress is a political system, and Herzl was the first Zionist politician. If you don't vote, the truth is that you actually voted. Okay, not voting is actually voting, and this is the paradigm that we must break. We must encourage North American Jewry to take an active part in these elections and to do what we all understand when it comes to politics. You need to vote because if you didn't vote, you actually voted. You let others to dictate the agenda.
And I've seen you say in just the last couple of weeks that Israel's democracy, to some extent, depends on these elections. I mean, is that your reference to the future of religious pluralism in Israel? What will happen to the diversity of views in the Knesset? I mean, is it because of the potential Haredi inroads that are being made into the Congress?
You know, we all remember that the more than 500 days that passed since October 7th. And indeed, October 7th was a pivotal moment in our history. But let's not forget that October 6th was not a paradise either. Okay, that the 10 months prior to October 7th were challenging moments, a moment in our history when hundreds of thousands of us Israelis were demonstrating in our streets, defending our democracy. I think that when Israel gets to October 8th, okay, we're not on October 8th yet, okay, when Israel gets to October 8th, one of the significant things that needs to be enhanced in Israel is the nature of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state in a way that would not be so easy to shake in our democracy. And on that scope, I think the involvement of world Jewry in what Israel is important. We have 17 million Jews in the world, 7.5 million Jews in Israel, 8 million Jews in North America, another 2 million Jews in other parts of the world, yet only one nation state for the Jewish people. And Israel belongs not only to us Israelis, Jews and non-Jews alike, and not only to us Israelis, but also to each and every Jew, wherever he or she is. And the way to to care for Israel and to be part of what Israel is by that participation in the Congress that allows you not the same power as voting to the Knesset. Of course, voting to the Knesset is way more powerful than voting to the Congress. But if you are part of the discourse that allocates more than $2.5 billion. Now I put together the budget of the Jewish Agency and Keren Kayemet Israel together. More than $2.5 billion. You actually influence in a dramatic way the way that Israel would look like in the future, in the next decade. So being part of what Israel is and what Zionism is sitting next to the table, and the only way to do it, if you don't live in Israel, is via this democratic tool that Herzl left us with.
You know, if I could shift gears for a moment, Yisar, and use you for your past and your current role, but with the Masorti movement, one of the things that troubles me to some extent in Israel is that we don't really have these conversations. We don't have conversations about religious pluralism. It's not an issue. Now, yeah, we're dealing with existential issues at times, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, hostages. But as we saw, and you mentioned this before, in the almost a year lead up to October 7th, we were ripping ourselves apart, setting ourselves up for this disaster. knowingly weakening ourselves over a domestic, local, democratic, what is the right separation of powers, judicial reform. The religious pluralism issue, you don't even see the parties in what's the so-called center left of the Knesset, which I don't even know if these definitions hold water anymore, but let's run with them. Yesh Atid, the National Unity Party of Benny Gantz, Yair Golan's Demokrati, Meretz, whatever he's calling it these days. I mean, the one person who I would say is actually tough on the Haredim, but not because necessarily of religious pluralism, is Avigdor Lieberman. But I mean, it's like a conversation that we don't have at all on the Israeli national agenda. So one is why, and two is how do we change that?
I, when you described it, I thought to myself, wow, do you remember like 3 years ago how privileged we are? We were to deal with Jewish pluralism issues. And then the judicial reform was introduced, and then October 7th, and all of a sudden it seems as if. So you're right. I feel that since the judicial reform was introduced in January 23, all other issues that has to do with democracy, not only with the Jewish identity, were pushed aside because we had to protect the very basics of our democratic nature. The democratic DNA of Zionism was under jeopardy, and we had to protect it. And these are more basic things than Jewish pluralism per se, although it is connected. So I know it's not part of the political discourse today, and we are so hooked up with more urgent things that it seems like who knows when we'll get there. Having said that, there are things that are changing that needs to be noticed. Firstly, the number of Israelis that associate themselves, they call themselves with the non-Orthodox movements. It's a number that is growing every year. The number of Masorti and Reform congregations is growing, but something that you can check it that has to do with Jewish pluralism, but not necessarily comes into practicing Reform and conservative Judaism. It's what we are experiencing with marriages in Israel. The Jewish population in Israel is growing. But if you would check how many people go to marry via the chief rabbinate, via the Orthodox monopoly, you would see that
In decline.
a flat number or even in decline. It means that more and more Jews in Israel could marry via the chief rabbinate, but understand that there is more than one way to be Jewish and take ownership on their Jewish identity. I take pride on it. Okay, I take pride for the fact that every year we see more and more and more Israelis celebrating their bar and bat mitzvah in the egalitarian kotel, in kotel HaMishpachot, in Jerusalem, and not in the separated kotel. So sometimes, changes come from top down, sometimes from bottom up. I think that it could be that this needed change will not come from the political scene, but it would come from bottom up. It will take more time, and I hope that when the next government of Israel will be convened, hopefully sooner than later, the next government of Israel would be convened, those issues would be relevant. And I can tell you that we are in discourse with all the parties that you mentioned in order to make sure that if they are part of the coming government when it comes, these things would not be neglected. In the last Shinui government of Bennett and Lapid, it was neglected, unfortunately. I hope that in the next government of Israel, that would be for sure more centrist than this one, those issues, at least some of them, will be addressed seriously. I would like to not to forget to invite everyone between March 10th and May 4th to log in to the American Zionist Movement website and to vote. AZM, a very easy 5 minutes, $5, make your voice heard by voting.
Dr. Yizhar Hess, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And to all our listeners and viewers, you can find us as always where podcasts can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and of course the website of Times of Israel. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us.